Explore the shocking truths behind history's deadliest nuclear disasters. Stay tuned as we count down the top 5. Number 5. The Windscale Fire, Britain's radioactive nightmare. In October 1957, the Windscale Fire marked one of Britain's worst nuclear disasters. Situated in northwest England, the Windscale nuclear plant was part of the country's Cold War mission to produce weapons-grade plutonium. However, this mission took a devastating turn, leaving a legacy of radioactive contamination. The disaster began when a fire ignited in one of the plant's graphite core reactors, burning uncontrollably for 3 days. The blaze released radioactive materials into the air, affecting the surrounding environment and population. Although officials tried to minimize the scale of the event, later studies linked the fallout to an increase in cancer cases and potentially hundreds of deaths. The cause of the fire was a risky experimental procedure designed to release trapped energy in the reactor's core. This method, pushed by political pressure to speed up production, caused the reactor to overheat and ignite. With no proper safety systems in place, the situation quickly escalated. In a desperate bid to extinguish the flames, workers flooded the reactor with water, a decision that spread more radioactive particles into the atmosphere. Despite efforts to downplay the incident, the Windscale Fire became a major turning point for nuclear safety regulations in Britain. What can this disaster teach us about the dangers of unchecked ambition? Stay tuned for the next story. Number 4. The Kyshtym Disaster, a Soviet secret. The Kyshtym Disaster, which occurred in 1957 in the Soviet Union, remains one of the most devastating nuclear accidents in history. This catastrophe took place at the Mayak Production Association, a plutonium production plant in the Chelyabinsk region. An explosion in a storage tank containing highly radioactive waste released a massive radioactive cloud over the surrounding area, contaminating more than 20,000 square kilometers. What makes the Kyshtym disaster particularly alarming is the secrecy surrounding it. The Soviet government, eager to maintain its nuclear ambitions during the Cold War, concealed the incident for decades. Residents in affected villages were not informed about the radiation exposure, and many were forced to evacuate without any explanation. The disaster caused widespread health issues, including increased cancer rates and genetic mutations among the exposed population. Even today, the full extent of the contamination is hard to measure. The disaster created a radioactive wasteland known as the East Ural Radioactive Trace, where radiation levels remain dangerously high. Despite its severity, the Kyshtym disaster is often overlooked compared to other nuclear events like Chernobyl or Fukushima. This hidden catastrophe highlights the devastating consequences of neglecting safety and transparency in the race for nuclear power. Could it serve as a warning for nations still pursuing secretive nuclear programs? Number 3. Santa Susana Field Laboratory Disaster, America's forgotten nuclear tragedy. In 1959, the Santa Susana Field Laboratory, located just 30 miles from Los Angeles, became the site of one of the worst nuclear accidents in U.S. history. This experimental research facility housed a small reactor called the Sodium Reactor Experiment, SRE, which suffered a partial meltdown. The reactor's core experienced severe overheating, releasing radioactive gases and particles into the surrounding environment. Shockingly, this disaster remained largely hidden from the public for decades. No official evacuation or containment measures were carried out at the time, and local communities were left unaware of the radioactive exposure. Studies later revealed that the accident released an estimated 459 times more radioactive iodine than the infamous 3 Mile Island incident. The consequences of the meltdown have been devastating. Nearby residents and former workers have reported higher incidences of cancer and other health issues. The site itself, now abandoned, remains heavily contaminated with radioactive and toxic materials. Cleanup efforts have faced significant delays due to bureaucratic challenges and corporate disputes. What makes the Santa Susana disaster particularly chilling is its proximity to a major urban area. This forgotten tragedy underscores the dangers of insufficient regulation and secrecy in nuclear research. Could such an accident happen again near densely populated areas? The lessons from this dark chapter in nuclear history must not be ignored. Number 2. Fukushima Daiichi Disaster, the double blow of nature and nuclear crisis. On March 11, 2011, Japan faced an unprecedented catastrophe when a massive 9.0 magnitude earthquake triggered a devastating tsunami, slamming into the northeastern coastline. Among the hardest-hit locations was the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, where nature's fury unleashed one of the most infamous nuclear disasters in history. The towering tsunami waves overwhelmed the plant's protective seawalls, flooding its cooling systems and cutting off power. With no way to cool the reactors, their cores overheated, leading to 3 devastating meltdowns. Explosions ripped through the reactor buildings, releasing radioactive materials into the atmosphere, soil, and ocean. The fallout forced the evacuation of over 150,000 residents, many of whom have never been able to return to their homes. Fukushima's impact went far beyond Japan. It reignited global debates on nuclear energy safety, prompting several countries to halt or scale back their nuclear programs. Cleanup and decontamination efforts at the site continue to this day, with a staggering timeline stretching into decades and costs exceeding hundreds of billions of dollars. What makes Fukushima so haunting is the combination of human vulnerability and natural power. It serves as a stark reminder of how even the most advanced technologies can falter in the face of nature's wrath. Could the disaster have been prevented with better preparation? That question lingers as the world reflects on the fragility of nuclear energy in an unpredictable world. Number 1. Chernobyl Disaster, the world's most catastrophic nuclear accident. On April 26, 1986, the world witnessed the deadliest nuclear disaster at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Pripyat, Ukraine, then part of the Soviet Union. A late-night safety test in Reactor 4 went disastrously wrong due to critical design flaws and operator errors. The result was a massive explosion that blew the reactor's roof off, releasing an enormous plume of radioactive material into the atmosphere. The explosion was so powerful it was visible from miles away, and the radioactive fallout spread across Europe, contaminating large areas for decades. Firefighters and plant workers who rushed to contain the disaster paid the ultimate price, many succumbing to radiation sickness within days. Thousands of deaths have since been linked to the disaster, though the exact toll remains a topic of debate. The Soviet Union initially tried to cover up the incident, but rising radiation levels across Europe forced them to admit the catastrophe. The cleanup, known as the Chernobyl Liquidators Operation, involved hundreds of thousands risking their lives to limit the spread of radiation. Even today, the Chernobyl exclusion zone remains uninhabitable, a ghostly reminder of the disaster. Chernobyl profoundly changed the global nuclear industry, leading to stricter safety regulations and fueling public skepticism of nuclear energy. It's a grim testament to human error and technological failure, a cautionary tale of what happens when nuclear power goes wrong.